So when we were speaking earlier with Ali Brahmi from the FAA and Patrick Key from EASA, both made the points that the current software standards need to be modernized, if you will. They need to meet the needs of new entrants that are coming into our industry. And we also heard from our first panel that some of the processes that we have in place need to build on some of the well-established ways so that both established applicants as well as the new entrants can be satisfied. So what I'd like to do now is switch to explore with some of the world's leading regulatory agencies some of the challenges that they are facing as the industry continues to innovate at a rate, again, that we talked about earlier, at a rate that sometimes can outpace the policies that are necessary to regulate those industries. So I'm pleased to have have joined me today for this discussion. Mr. Benedito Masayuki Sakugawa from the National Civil Aviation Agency of Brazil, ANAC, Dr. Michael Romanowski, the Director of Policy and Innovation at the FAA, Mr. Patrick Desbiens, the Engineering Manager for Electronic Equipment Design Assurance and Cybersecurity at Transport Canada, and Maria Algar-Ruiz, the Drone Program Manager at EASA. So thank you all for being here today. I've asked each of our panelists to share some of their perspectives as a start, and then we'll get into a Q&A session. So Maria, why don't you start things off for us?
Thank you very much, and Terry and Eurocai and RTCA for having invited me to participate in this very interesting panel on rules and regulation governing software in emerging areas such as UAS and UAM. Good afternoon and good morning to all the participants virtually, so great pleasure to be here. As we see in the recent years, there are an emerging number of technologies enable new aviation business models, new operations, and this opened the door to new entrants, new people, new companies, startups with new ideas. These new entrants present challenges, but also a lot of opportunities. This has been highlighted by previous speakers as our Executive Director, Patrick Key, in his speech. In my presentation, in the first part of my introduction, I will concentrate to address the key questions that they were put forward for this panel. Those are the strategies available to us as a regulator to deal with those new entrants in the software development for aviation. The questions on our advice to those software developers, and the question on challenges for us as regulators and those software developments for autonomous operations. In the first question, I would like to highlight that we believe regulators, we need to be open-minded. We need to be to change our mindset and depart from specifying prescriptive rules. The software developers need to follow prescriptive AMCs and guidance material that they need to meet in order to achieve the regulatory objectives. So we need to give these new entrants the opportunity to come up with alternative means of compliance, alternative standards that we met the regulatory objectives that we need to set. Therefore, we need to set clear objectives that they need to meet. And we need to consider, when setting those clear objectives in the regulation, we need to consider our arguments as well as societal acceptance and expectations for when using these new designs for new services. We have several tools in EASA that we have implemented over the past several years. So we have the Innovation Partnership Contracts, we have Memorandum of Understanding, Memorandum of Cooperation, Technical Advisory contracts that they are more close to projects closer to the certification step. With all these tools, exploratory meetings, manifestos, networks, so we try to address these new entrants. We try to explore with these new companies They give us a flexible approach to deal with innovation and allow us to identify and remove barriers in earlier steps while ensuring that the safety objectives that we have established are met. Example of those are, we have external and internal examples. I will give you one, for instance, the network of U.S.-based demonstrators that we have established back in 2018, together with the European Commission, Eurocontrol, and SU to deal with these new companies in the area of US-based UTM. And we have established internally an innovation network which allow us to discuss across EASA directorates and to enable to identify early enough in the process, perhaps talents that they are in non-operational directorates that they are dealing with innovation topics such as artificial intelligence of blockchains. On the second question of what sort of advice can we give regulators to new software developers, our advice to them is to don't consider certification or the involvement of EASA as the last steps or the last hurdle in the process that they need to take in order to tick the box. They should consider EASA and other certification authorities as a partner in the process. They should come up to us as soon as the design starts to mature. This early involvement will allow to the risk the certification of innovative designs and will allow to overcome possible obstacles that we may face afterwards. We see this is coming more and more often now. It has not been the case in the past, and we have, as I explained before, the innovation partnership contracts that we are using prior to the certification steps and allows us to go as far as address new ideas, new methodologies to deal with a new concept and also to deal and assess new software. On the questions of the challenges for us regulators to deal with autonomous operations and software to supporting autonomous operations, we in EASA see it a little bit premature to discuss about fully autonomous operations. Perhaps you will not agree with me, but we see we are not yet there to discuss standards to support software development for fully autonomous operations. We see some applications, and we see, of course, a transition, a huge transition from lower level of automations to higher level of automation. We see some areas where some applications get a higher level of autonomy, but similarly to what happened in the self-driving cars field, we see that it's easier to reach the 98% of capabilities while it will take the community a while and a lot of difficulties to get the 99.999% of performance. This goes, of course, together with addressing the efforts that we take to reach societal acceptance of this. This is the same for autonomous operations in the field of UAS and in the fields of VTOLs. Another major challenge is the transition from the current state of automation to fully autonomous operations, for instance, accommodating autonomous or self-driving vehicles in a network of manned vehicles that can be applied to aircraft and as well as self-driving cars. This is a very complex exercise, and this has led us, for instance, in the field of accommodating UAS operations together with manned aircraft in the field of UTM to abandon the idea to expect that a pilot will be able to take decisions to deconflict on the basis of UTM services. We believe this will take a while until we are able to achieve that stage, and this will be a challenge for software developers as well as for regulators. I will stop here in my first intervention, and ready to go on and build on some of these points that I put forward in my introduction. Thank you. Back to you, Terry.
Thanks, Mia. Appreciate that. Benedito, I'll turn things over to you for some of your perspectives to start.
Okay. So thank you very much for inviting ANAC to attend this event. It was very, very important. I have a short presentation. So how could I do? I have to share the screen or?
No, it's on the screen.
Okay.
Can you see it?
All right. Yeah. But I cannot control the.
Yep, you can. If you go to the corner, you can see pin.
Okay.
Just pin the presentation, and that should bring it up.
Okay.
For you.
So my presentation is focused on those 3 points: the challenges, strategies, and advice. Those were the questions that the organizer has previously provided to us. But I will focus more on ANAC internal necessities. How can I go to next screen? Okay, so the challenges in general, like we identify like AI and cybersecurity as the main challenge in terms of technology. That everybody will be talking about that. Like, so for AI, the current guidance is not adequate. We have issues on requirements captures and verification methods, etc. And then cybersecurity for the UAS as a real-time distributed system, which heavily rely on communication. So we have additional concerns on cybersecurity. And the strategy is like a phase implementation. Of course, like we start with non-critical application, for instance, less populated areas, no passenger. And gradually we can evolve to more critical and complex systems. In ANAC, for the ANAC case of challenges, like we at ANAC, we are geographically, we are very distant from major centers. And we have only one very strong applicant, which like focus more on foreign market. But very recently, we start to have like very growing market for UAS, and it's leading by local industries. For instance, we published our rule, UAS rule, in 2017, and currently we have more than 8,000 drones flying legally in Brazil. And some companies are already like coming with products with increasing capability and criticality. But we perceive that like local industries, they have little experience with certification. So our challenges are two challenges, right? How to work with inexperienced local industries, and also how to keep in line with major centers, because now we are going to deal with local industry, local things, and we'll be kind of away from major centers. So as a strategy for those challenges, like how to keep in line with major centers, that's very, very straightforward. We should be aligned with the main authorities by emphasize the bilateral agreements and the regulations compatibilities and recognition of ACs, TSOs, etc. And we also have to keep up to date with the guidance evolution. So we attend many like working groups, international working groups, and those working groups there are mainly with UAS, software, cybersecurity, and AI. But we still have to think about how to keep update with what those foreigners and main foreign industries, how do they work, because we will be dealing with local industries. Another strategy is how to work with inexperienced local industry. We are like organizing events, workshops, seminars, courses, and we also be invited to do lectures and courses that, for like industries and universities. And one thing that I feel it's very important is to keep the closer proximity with local industries. We have a project at ANAC that we start this project not for UAS but for transport category, and at that time it was the first time that the company was developing like in-house software that way, and using the model-based development, the old 331. So in common agreement, we decided to have more continuous involvement with them, with a technical visit inside of their development site, very informal way, but it was very productive. And at the end of the certification, we did a workshop for lessons learned, and it was very fruitful. So we intend to use the same experience and extend that for those small industries. And another thing, as a strategy, we believe that we should better explore the virtual tools, because now we will have like many industries, small industries with limited budget, and the country is very big, so we have to find a way to keep in touch with them. So we have another project which we call a roadmap for incorporating virtual tools into software age certification activity. So in this roadmap, we are doing an interview with managers. We are doing like brainstorming and surveys with industries and the military certification team. And we are collecting information to identify kinds of activities that we can perform like virtually, like remotely, and those that we still need to perform on site. And we are also developing guidelines for how to perform like a remote assessment or virtual meetings. So about advice to software developers, I used to be a software developer also. So these advice are more like for those software developers from those new entrants, like domestic industries. So we tell them like, be organized and transparent. That's very important. And share your concern as earlier as possible with us, because we don't have the map. It's going to be a very new experience for us also. So we have to have like mutual collaboration, and it's important to be transparent and to contact us. And also you should understand what software safety is, and understand certification, and understand what is our role, because when we do assessment in companies like software audits, sometimes we find very good developers, but we ask questions and they don't understand what's the point of the question, because I feel that they don't understand exactly what certification is and what is our role and what's the intention of our audit and of our assessment. And also be aware of the issues on AI. And to software related professionals, I mean, those people that will provide services, or those people that will provide like tool vendors or things like that. Not the applicant itself, but those professionals that will support the applicants. We believe they should enlarge their knowledge scope and be more have more interaction with other domains, because now we feel that this artificial border between software, hardware, and system, and cybersecurity and ground system, everything is becoming very integrated. And for those small companies, they can't afford like hire specific professionals. So they need a professional that can deal with all those issues together. So I think that's it.
Great. Thank you, Benedito. Appreciate that. Dr. Romanowski, we give the stage to you.
All right. Thank you, Terry. Great to be here with you. Thanks for the invitation, and the rest of the panelists. Thanks for the opportunity to be here with you. So, Terry, I'm going to follow the model that the others have talked about and really go through the challenges, the strategies, and the advice side. But I think where I want to start with the challenges is maybe a little bigger picture. One of the biggest challenges we have is just talking to each other right now and having clarity of what do we mean when we talk about autonomy? What do we mean when we talk about artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the role of what's coming on with these programs? And the reason I say that is we see such a diversity of products, concepts, applications, and operating environments that span the full continuum of everything from small UAS operating in remote areas to full higher degrees of autonomy and automation embedded into large transports. We see move to advanced air mobility type applications. We see movement towards larger, more complex UAs that would be spanning the, delivering cargo and all these sorts of things. So there's such a diversity, and there's such a diversity of safety impact associated with those operations that we sometimes confuse ourselves by trying to use blanket terms. There's things that operate now that we just kind of call software and automation that 30 years ago we would have said was autonomous, right? So again, it's the kind of thing that we just got to be a little clear when we're talking about the application. But embedded in all of that really gets fundamentally down to continued shifting roles and challenges to our conventional assumptions. So, talking about UAS, for example, the concepts that we're seeing, the concepts that we're working on certification right now and operational approvals fundamentally challenge some of our basic assumptions of what does it mean to be a pilot? What does it mean? The dependence on non-aviation infrastructure, and how do we account for that in the safety oversight? How do we align to that? Those are things, for the vehicle approval, the operational approval, the maintenance assumptions, and the continued operational safety management. All those things come into play, as well as the aspect of community acceptance of all of these range of products. So those are really macro challenges that we're dealing with that go well beyond development of regulation and standards, right? So, but as you mentioned, things that Ali talked about this morning, right? One of those strategies for us to actually advance that in the FAA is to engage the industry very closely, working very closely with the UAS community. For example, we had the integrated pilot projects that has now that was very successful in seeing extended applications. We've extended that out into the Beyond initiative to advance beyond visual line of sight operations. On a broader sense, we formed now a couple of years ago in the Aircraft Certification Organization, our Center for Emerging Concepts and Innovation, where we are bringing any applicant in to talk through their concepts and lay out with them a clear path to certification of those projects. Whether that and actually looking beyond that to the operational insertion of those products, because certification without the operational approvals really doesn't mean much, does it? So But that's been incredibly successful for all of these strategies have been incredibly successful for us. At any one point in the center, we're working with about 90 different projects that run the gamut. Some of them are related to high degrees of automation and autonomy. Some of them are advanced vehicle concepts, other products and services. Right now, we're working on about 30 unmanned aircraft type certifications. We laid out we're fortunate in that our regulatory framework in the FAA gives us a lot of flexibility to actually embrace and account for new technologies through the use of special conditions, unique certification bases. We did take advantage of that and issued a special class for some of the small UA type certification, where our framework was to look at the overall vehicle performance, its reliability, and those were all noticed out in the Federal Register back in the fall. So we have the ability to implement a flexible regulatory environment, and that's supplemented when we start looking at things like Part 23 with our performance-based framework and reliance on consensus standards as means of compliance. So I think, across the board, we have strategies that can account for these things. We are working as well on what should the operational framework look like and evolve. We aren't quite as flexible there. We have to go through an exemption process, but that is being worked. And, my timing might be, it was in the last week or two, we announced the Beyond Visual Line of Sight Aviation Rulemaking Committee, where we're bringing close to 100 stakeholders together with the FAA to look at how should the regulatory environment for low altitude unmanned aircraft and their operations evolve. And that's kicking off actually tomorrow. So there's a lot of things that we're looking at. We're also looking at, as Ali mentioned, on the software side, what are the ways we should be looking beyond the current framework to enable greater innovation and flexibility. We've had with the EASA some work going on looking at overarching properties and abstraction layers and those types of initiatives to further advance that. But really focusing on rather than looking at discrete software performance requirements, what are the overarching performance we're expecting on the software and that integration? So I think that really kind of underpins it. George Romanowski, our chief scientist in software, is one of the folks that's at the forefront of that activity. And I guess the other thing I will say, now transitioning that into the advice segment, first thing I would say is if folks have new concepts, things they want to be working on, and they're not engaged with the FAA, please come and get engaged with the FAA. We have James Wellborn is now running our Center for Emerging Concepts and Innovation. You could reach out to me. You can reach out to James. Their host, Jay Merkel at the UAS Integration Office and his team. Any one of those folks can get you hooked up working with the FAA. But I think the other things I would say to everybody is looking at being clear, what are you really trying to achieve with the systems? Focusing in on the overarching performance that we're trying to achieve. Looking beyond what are the conventional ways to achieve that. We are open to considering those sorts of things. We've been working, what is the role of agile principles as we move forward here? We've been looking at that from a policy point of view, but also just from a development point of view. How do we reflect that in the approaches that we're considering? Understanding the importance of architecture in setting software requirements. It's not as straightforward of saying, okay, well, that's involving a flight control system. It has to be level A. Well, no, you can architect a flight control system that doesn't require level A. So how do we knit these things together? But those are the kinds of things, Terry, that'll come through the discussions on the specifics of a program and its framework with working with the agency. So we are open to that. We look forward to that engagement. and look forward to continuing to work with the community as well on this full range of issues. So with that, Terry, I'll kick it back to you.
Great, thanks, Mike. Great insight. You mentioned George, and we'll be hearing more from George tomorrow in one of the sessions. So really appreciate those insights. Patrick, from Transport Canada's perspective.
Hi, thank you for having me. A lot of very interesting points were raised by other panelists. As far as the challenge, well, let me bring a certification practitioner perspective. What I see is that the landscape obviously is changing a lot. Cert authorities and specialists are trained to deal mostly with white box type of designs driven by requirements, using most of the time proven technologies and components developed to a high criticality level. This is changing. What we're dealing with is applicants and projects where the compliance demonstration is accounted for from the get-go most of the time. And we're also familiar with digital system architectural solutions that meet the design goals set by safety analysis, and they're relatively similar across industry with variation, and the general interfaces of the software are, we know where to look for them and what would be the potential failure path. And we're also dealing with applicants who have significant, certification experience and understand the regulator's expectation. We also leverage a delegation system, delegates, DERs. So our role oftentimes is to perform some support delegates, get involved with delegates, accomplish some surveillance. And the new landscape or the upcoming landscape is different in many ways. As been said before, there's a larger amount of cost component. So the design data isn't always available to support the approval, let alone some supplier configuration control issues and challenges that are not new, but seems to be taking more importance if you compare that with the traditional custom design, where all the data is available. Also, looking at UAS, depending on the degree of autonomy, ground stations, communication links constitute a big part of the safety case, including the cybersecurity angle. So the design approval expertise centers need to develop the expertise. So there's a lot of knowledge management going on internally, at least at Transport Canada. And we can see that applicants are looking for a certification path for their design. But oftentimes those new designs do not lend themselves to a compliance demonstration to high level of design assurance because of the above. So we can see that it may result in lower component integrity levels and by choice or just because the demonstration is more challenging to make, which leads to complex architectural strategies, mitigations to meet these safety goals. So there's a level of complexity there that may come up. And applicants and their technical experts may have a lesser amount of certification experience, as been said, but they're having much higher expectations as far as time to market. So this is a very challenging combination for us. Understood the newer technologies call for new means of compliance, and this is a challenge, but it's a challenge for both regulators and industry here. So the challenge, again, new concept of operational, environment and advanced technology create the need for new standards. So same as industry, the regulators are facing the challenge of, utilizing the time of their experienced certification expert in the development and standard versus supporting the ongoing applications that keep coming in. So we do have knowledge management to do, and we need also to keep an eye as much as we can on the development of standard. That's a challenge. As we see as well by, what we see in the working groups for new standards, that there's a number of technical experts from the emerging industry that, as smart as innovative as they are, they may have limited understanding of the foundation of the awareness frameworks and requirements and of the regulators' expectation. I've been exposed to sort of program with newer or less experienced companies, not necessarily with new technology, but I can see how difficult it may be as a learning experience for them. If we look back at when ARP 4754 or the new DO1CC supplement were introduced, there were some challenges there, but and that was in the context of experienced established applicants. So heading towards a more diverse landscape will bring challenges there. So we're on the learning curve as regulator, and we have to acknowledge that as we're looking for harmonized regulation and level playing field within and across jurisdictions, and to maintain the level of air safety and the confidence of the public. That's key for us. As far as the strategy, well, number one is we need to understand the technologies. There are specific development cycles. So to help identifying their vulnerabilities, the way that it could fail. And I don't mean to be negative, but it's our role to see, well, you're bringing new technology, new development cycle. Let's figure out where we need, whether the existing standard address their vulnerability. Sometimes they don't, because the development cycle is different. So our role is to make sure that it's not so much to see how we can apply the existing standard, but where are the potential vulnerabilities of development cycles being proposed and how we can address them, bring in the assurance that is needed. And that's, I guess, our mindset to a large extent. So, and our strategy is to get involved as much as we can, and it's not always easy to find the bandwidth to do that, but get involved with the working groups, RTCA, EuroCai committees to contribute in a way that ensures that the outcome of their works would be can be recognized as acceptable means of compliance and establish that harmonized level playing field. So I can see that the strategy of regulators right now is really to apply a gradual approach, starting with lower risk methodologies and concept of operation, with a vision of broadening the risk perimeter. So that way it allows the stakeholders to step in and to understand each other's expectation. So this is an ongoing work, but I believe there's no other way. There's no shortcuts there. So we have to keep this safety risk-based framework, but adapt it in a top-down fashion. I'd say that as far as exceeding existing regulation, well, the new standards will be different to some extent. So it will be a challenge to gauge whether they're exceeding or not exceeding existing regulation. They have to be adapted to the specifics of the life cycles being proposed in technology and move from there. At Transport Canada, we're striving right now to have a more integrated organization across the country. Headquarters in Ottawa used to deal with more complex a large scale program in the regions and with more limited type of design change approval. But now complex projects are coming in from all over the place, and we need to work as a more integrated organization and manage, I'd say, the transition from operational standard oriented approval in UAS word, for example, transition from operation standard to design approval. That's one of our challenges. I don't know how I'm doing on time, but as far as advice, well, the question that was labeled, for this presentation seemed to assume that one can design a system without considering the awareness framework and regulators' expectation to begin with, and then hope that no additional work will be needed once the regulator is exposed to their design. Obviously, that's not the best way. The angle rather should be how you can ensure that your system performs their intended functions and with no unintended behavior and are fail safe. That's the angle of the authority. So my advice would be to new entrants to acquire the certain expertise that they need, and to do that early. Get involved on working groups, such as RTCA, EuroCai, and know the landscape. And do that even before the procurement stage. If you rely on third parties to supply components and equipment that may have an impact on safety and security, then you will manage your certification risks better by factoring in those certification considerations. And if the domestic authority has a design approval delegation framework, then we should seriously consider getting the help of delegates at early stages of the program and establish communication with the cert authorities. So that would be the key points that I wanted to start with. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Patrick. Well, we've got a few more minutes for some questions. Patrick, like you brought it up, so I'll just start with the whole aspect of harmonization. And certainly as someone that came from the industry, that harmonization of regulations is certainly an important part of being an operator, certainly an important aspect, I think, from a certification standpoint. So in the area of software standards, especially some of the new ones or the new regulations that are going to be put in place, what are the regulators doing right now to ensure some of that harmonization is taking place? Mike, you want to start off, and then I'll let anybody else join in as they want to go.
Sure. I'll take it on. I mentioned in my remarks, Terry, that we are working closely with EASA on some of the software concepts, right? And looking at how do we expand the framework of what's acceptable in that context of, again, looking towards overarching properties, looking at extraction layers and those sorts of things, and how can we reflect those into the framework and embrace alternate standards to achieve compliance with the requirements. There's always a lot of activity also going on across the authorities. The 4 authorities here are all members of our regulatory certification management team. We work across the product lines to continually promote harmonization of requirements, not just software, but across the board, right? System safety work, human factors work, software, all of those things are relevant to the discussion we're having today. So yeah, there's a lot of work that goes on in maintaining harmonization. But I think the other thing I would just add is we shouldn't, we still have to embrace innovation and keep the goal of harmonization, because we're not going to, the approach we're all taking is not to change the regulations, then work the products. We have to do those things concurrently. And in our case, we're certainly leveraging the regulatory framework we have while we're gaining enough experience to determine how should we be changing the regulations, if at all, right? So, there is a natural tension there when it comes to harmonization. And we work to try to make sure we're at least sharing strategies and aligning to the best we can as we're doing that too. So.
Any other thoughts on the panelists?
Well, harmonization is key, and it makes, and Benedito probably understand where I'm coming from. We have a big industry, and the best way to serve our industry there is to make sure that the domestic approval meet the expectation from the big markets, FA and EASA. So the more harmonized we manage to be, the easier our work, at least from that perspective of presenting certification expectations that will satisfy. And if the expectations are the same, then we're good. So we need that. Yeah.
Several people have brought up just today, some of the need for software standards as they apply to security. What do you see as some of the trends from the regulator, whether it's at the large commercial level or even at the Part 23 level? Are there some trends going on in the security area? Maria? I'll call on you.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Terry. I mean, there are, of course, obviously some trends on how to deal with cybersecurity in the area of the software being developed, of course, on how to address cybersecurity from the design perspective. In EASA, and I agree with the previous speakers, there is a lot of appetite to harmonize in those areas, and I think it's not less in the area of cybersecurity. In EASA, we have recently published a framework to address cybersecurity cross-domain, which we call information security management approach. And we try to address cybersecurity basically in all levels, from the design, but also from the operations, maintenance, the management, the ATM management, because when we go towards interconnecting systems, so UAS, which they have the C2 connected to the ground, but they are also connected to a network of UTM. So every weak point and that chain can create from the cybersecurity point of view, and we see cybersecurity attacks more and more often right now. Any weak point in those connections, in those links, will create a safety issue. So our approach, as I said, is at the moment to work on more on information security management systems and to work on addressing cybersecurity across domain. And of course, relying on industry standards such as EUROCAE RTCA, and we expect to work together. And this is really how we see harmonization really being achieved, as this will be the basis to be used in order to support those information security management systems. I'll leave it there. Back to you.
Okay. Mike, Benedito, Patrick, any other thoughts on the cybersecurity?
Yes. At ANAC, we had some experience with applying cybersecurity concerns. But we opened the FAAs, but it was very limited to the product itself. And how can I say? The cybersecurity, the main concern is at the system level, right? Like the DO 326 and 356, they provide guidelines and they use the ARP 4754 as a life cycle. So like as impact in the software, it's not clear yet, but we know that it comes as a requirement, and it will be tagged as a system requirement because that's the scope of security innovation. And it will come with some additional architecture that was inserted by security concerns. But those experience we had so far, we didn't have, the industry didn't have to work on specific security concerns because the product was already made and they did kind of reevaluation and reverse engineering. Let's say it wasn't really reverse engineering, but they had to reevaluate their system to see if they comply with the FCAR. So I think the way the security is very dynamic issue, right? So now they are updating, like they insert like a sharing risk that will be more broader scope, and also management of security events. I think that will also be something that so far we are not aware of, but we have to concern in for the next program.
There's a couple of questions from the audience that are kind of related, and it involves training of the new entrants. I think both Benedito and Patrick, you brought up the maybe a little bit of lack of experience with some of the new entrants that are coming in, don't understand everything. Mike, you mentioned maybe a little bit of difference in language, even understanding what it is they're trying to do. You know, what can we maybe just get your thoughts about what we as an industry can do, or what you as a regulator can do to help train some of the new folks coming into aviation and help them along with that? Are there things that we can be proactive with in that area?
So Terry, I know you and we've talked about this offline several times, but I think one thing I want to highlight is I've been extremely impressed with the talent and experience that the new firms are able to bring to the table, and the seriousness of their endeavor. And what we find very clearly are the folks that are successful moving forward are the ones that do take the aviation responsibilities seriously and go and not only get technical talent they need, but they get regulatory talent that they need. So I think that's been an area, and it's impressive when you go visit the companies just to see the range and diversity of skills that they have and their ability to bring highly qualified people on board. But from the point of view of the community, it is embracing them in the work in the groups, you've been bringing them into the RTCA products, as have the other standards groups, and they're integral stakeholders. And in fact, in many ways, what we're seeing is they have an agility that sometimes our legacy folks can't keep up with, and they in many become they may emerge to be some of the stronger competitors going forward. So it's always a dynamic industry. I think we just continue to work together as a community. We'll be there.
Yeah, I think there's a lot we can learn from them too. So because as we learn as we continue to enhance our processes and put more efficiency into those processes, they can help us with that, so that we're again working that together. So, well, I'm afraid we're out of time. Gosh, we could go on, I think, for another hour, but I really want to thank you all, Maria, Benedito, Michael, Patrick. I mean, great discussion, great insights, great perspectives, and I know our audience got a lot out of it too. I certainly did. So thank you very much. Appreciate your time this morning, this afternoon.